The Vienna Gambit is an exciting and ambitious opening in chess. It allows white to take control of the center early and create strong attacking chances against the black king. It begins with you playing the knight to c3. Notice, not the kingside knight, because you want to leave space for the pawn on the kingside to move forward, and that is exactly what you do on the next turn. Now you are striking at the center, confirming the old chess wisdom. Everyone has a plan until they get hit by the f-pawn. At this point, your opponent is already in some trouble because they can no longer just play ordinary developing moves. Let's see what could easily happen if your opponent simply develops their knight and prepares to castle. You exchange pawns in the center, then push your pawn forward, attacking the opponent's knight. Wherever that knight moves, for example, if it retreats, you continue by pushing your pawn to a5. This creates a very common problem for black in the Vienna Gambit. The knight has no good squares to go to. It cannot move toward the queenside because of white's queen, and it cannot move to the center because of white's knight. As a result, the pawn push forces the knight all the way back to its original square, meaning black has wasted time moving the knight around without gaining any advantage. Now, after you develop your knight to f3, black might try to remove your advanced pawn so they can finally bring their knight back into play. In response, you develop your bishop to c4, and this is another key idea behind the Vienna Gambit. Since you have opened the f-file and plan to castle kingside, your bishop now adds strong pressure toward the opponent's king, with your knight also ready to jump forward and increase the attack. You can already see where this is going. Black is about to face serious trouble. Often your opponent will try to pin your knight to stop it from advancing, but after you castle, if your opponent captures your pawn on a5, expecting you to recapture, that's when the real surprise begins. You play bishop takes f7, sacrificing the bishop and forcing the king out. Then you follow up with knight takes a5, creating a powerful attack. At this point, the position becomes extremely dangerous for black. The bishop would like to capture your queen, but it cannot, because your knight is giving a check to the king. And the king cannot capture the knight, since your rook on the f-file is also targeting it. The result is a double check, a deadly situation where the king is attacked from two sides and has no easy escape. The king is forced to retreat, and now you simply capture the queen on g4. At this point, you are completely winning. The king is exposed, your knight is ready to jump to f7, and all your attacking pieces are perfectly placed. As the ancient Greek philosopher Socrates once said, "I know that I know nothing." By using the Vienna Gambit, you make your opponent realize the same thing, and it often happens as early as the third move. Your opponent is already out of preparation and facing confusion. Many players think the simplest solution is to capture the pawn on f4, but that is one of the most common mistakes for black. You then push your pawn forward, chasing away the knight, and as we already know, that knight has no safe squares left. All the forward squares are controlled by your pieces. The knight is forced to retreat all the way back to g8, a very disappointing position since it ends up right where it started. Sometimes your opponent may try to pin your pawn instead, attacking it at the same time. But you have a simple and powerful response. Play queen to e2, which unpins your pawn and renews the threat to the knight. Eventually, the knight is pushed back again, and you continue with knight to f3, a natural developing move that also controls key central squares, making sure the opponent's queen can never check your king on that diagonal. Next, you advance your pawn to d4, taking more control over the center of the board. This move not only claims valuable space, but also threatens to push the pawn forward, chasing away the opponent's knight. At the same time, it opens the diagonal for your bishop, allowing you to recapture the pawn on f4 if needed. Life is already looking good. Black's position feels cramped and uncomfortable. It becomes very difficult for them to develop their pieces, especially the bishop and the knight, as everything is starting to get tangled up. Usually black will try to ease the pressure by playing pawn to d6, inviting you to exchange pawns and perhaps even hoping to trade queens, which would certainly benefit them. But instead, you strike with your knight, jumping forward to deliver a fork on the queen and the pawn on c7, which black must defend at all costs. Because of that, the queen is forced to move, usually to one of two squares where it can still guard c7. No matter which square the queen chooses, your knight then jumps forward again with a check, continuing the attack. This knight truly becomes a fork master, creating threats everywhere, though eventually it may be captured. After that, when the pawn on d6 is taken, an amusing situation arises. Black would love to recapture that pawn, but doing so would open a discovered check from your bishop, which would immediately win their queen. Let's say your opponent captures your pawn, but then retreats their knight all the way back to g8. That's actually great news for you. Your opponent has achieved absolutely nothing. You simply continue with knight to f3 as usual, while keeping an eye on important central squares for any potential threats. After that, you advance your pawn to d4, taking full control of the center. This move opens the diagonal for your dark squared bishop and prepares to recapture the pawn on f4 later. Everything is developing perfectly for white. If black decides to capture on e5, you can certainly recapture. But since your development is already far ahead, it often makes even more sense to play in the attacking style of Paul Morphy or Mikhail Tal, focusing on rapid piece activity and direct threats. You can develop your bishop to c4, eyeing the weak pawn on f7, but before that, it's often smart to give an intermediate check with your bishop. After your opponent blocks the diagonal, usually by pushing their pawn to c6, you calmly retreat your bishop back to c4. That small in-between move actually helps a lot. By pushing the pawn to c6, black has blocked their own knight from developing to that square, making it even harder for them to complete development. Meanwhile, you're still threatening knight takes a5, and if black tries something like bishop to g4, it runs into yet another strong check, keeping the attack alive and the pressure constant. We've seen this idea before. The Vienna Gambit is full of sharp tactics. If your opponent captures your pawn, expecting simple trades, you can safely ignore it and launch a full attack instead. If they capture your knight, hoping to exchange queens, you refuse, because you're about to win the queen outright. You play bishop takes f7, deflecting the king. If the king captures, it loses protection of the queen on d8. The king tries to stay close to defend, but now it's completely exposed. You strike with queen to e2 check, the king captures your bishop, and then knight takes a5, chasing the king further. Wherever it moves, it runs into more danger. The e-file is deadly because of discovered attacks. Finally, when the king steps to f6, you play the brilliant bishop to g5, sacrificing the bishop to lure the king forward, finishing with a crushing checkmate by the knight. Could black avoid all this by playing pawn to d6 early? Maybe for a while, but it's a passive move. It blocks the bishop, doesn't fight for the center, and leaves black struggling to hold the position while you keep attacking relentlessly. You play bishop to b5, pinning the knight, and black responds with bishop to d7 to neutralize the pin. After pawn to d3, the position starts to resemble the classical Italian game, except you have an important advantage, the pawn on f4. This pawn gives you more attacking chances, especially once you castle and bring your rook to the f-file, where it can support a kingside attack. Interestingly, the two most common moves for black, pawn to a6 and bishop to a7, both overlook a key detail. The pawn on e5 is undefended. You can exchange the knight on c6 and then capture the pawn on e5, winning material. On the next move, you can even capture on c6, ruining black's pawn structure on the queen side. Now you're a pawn up, your center is strong, your rook has an open file, and your bishop is perfectly placed on a powerful diagonal. Black, on the other hand, is left with weaknesses everywhere, and you already hold a clearly winning position. Thanks for watching. I hope you understand all these variation. If you found this video is helpful, then like and subscribe.